good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on from where you're joining us today. Welcome to this Agile Business webcast series broadcast, Global, Distributed, and Agile, Winning Strategies for Efficient Application Development. This webcast is brought to you by CMC Media and is sponsored by CollabNet. I'm Francesca Matu, and I'll be your moderator for today's webcast. In a few moments, Brian Zajac will join us to discuss strategies for efficient application development. But first, a few housekeeping details. Our live cast environment is intended to be completely interactive, so you will have the ability to post your questions at any time during the broadcast or chat with other attendees about the session. We will address audience questions at the conclusion of the webcast during the Q&A period. If we are unable to get to all of your questions during the presentation, someone will follow up via email. To ask a question, simply use the live chat window located to the right of the screen under the tab Chat. You can also undock the chat box from the screen using the pop-out button at the bottom right corner of the chat box. That way it won't get hidden behind the slides. If you would like to share your thoughts about today's presentation, please use the Facebook tab located to the right of the screen. Log into your account and you will have the ability to share your experience with your friends. You can also share your experience through Twitter. Click on the Twitter tab to the right of the screen and join the conversation. Your tweets will show up in the Twitter roll to the right. Make sure to use the hashtag #AgileLC. If you would like a copy of the presentation materials for today's session, you will find a button to download a copy of today's presentation and other files under the Links tab at the right of the webcast window. A recording of the entire live broadcast, including Q&A, will be available in about 24 hours at this same location, so you can come back again or recommend it to a friend. And finally, if you ever need to get a closer look at any of the slides during the presentation, just hover your mouse over the video player and click the full button to expand to full screen. Okay, so let me introduce our speakers joining us today. Brian Zajac is a leading expert in Agile software development and goal-directed, user-centric design theory. At CollabNet, a global leader in application performance management solutions, he drives product management from the CollabNet TeamForge platform. His other projects include requirements analysis, designing user interfaces, wireframing, and rapid prototyping. Brian also has extensive experience in web development and standards, including rich internet application design and development using Flash and ActionScript. Prior to CollabNet, he worked as a senior interaction designer at Merkid Systems, Ariba, and Quadramed. And now the floor is yours, Brian.
Hi, I'm Brian Zajac, and I want to talk to you a little bit today about some things that I've had in the past, some experience I've had in the past around running global development teams that are distributed and how the Agile development process fits in with that. And so I want to talk some winning strategies on how to do that effectively and efficiently around application development. I'm the TeamForge product manager here at CollabNet, so I have a lot of experience both with running Agile teams as well as with using Agile project management tools. What I'd like to talk before we get into some of the details, I'd like to spend some time talking about distributed Agile and how we got here. So there's a lot of drivers around moving to distributed development. The graph at the top here is kind of showing some of the major things. So you can look at that. There's a cost advantage to move to a distributed environment. There's also an increased speed of market. You can actually move quicker if you have teams working around the clock. And you can increase productivity in distributed teams as well because you have, again, teams working around the clock. There's also, a growth strategy. That's another reason why teams want to move to more distributed, that they can actually target much more regional areas and provide development for regional areas if the need arises. And then also, another important part is that it can improve operational effectiveness and processes if you have, large teams working all over the globe. And there's also competitive pressure. If you have a competitor that is strong in a certain region and you're not strong in that region, you might want to have development teams that are targeted in those areas. And then the other one is you're going to actually, another sort of driver for it is to actually improve product quality. So if you have, you can have a lot more testers in certain areas actually testing things that are working around the clock for development. So one thing that we do internally is we would have one team do the development, and then the QA side would wake up on the other side and actually start to do some of the QA, some of the back-end QA work. So those are some of the drivers around doing distributed development. Another big driver, another big theme around is Agile development. And some of the drivers around to move to Agile is a need for improved collaboration. So having people sitting side by side and being able to collaborate across different silos, historical silos in the development organization, such as across IT, across business, and even across customers. The other option is, the other driver mainly is around a desire to release products more efficiently and more frequently. So the big tenet of Agile is you can get out from a 6-month every year release to an every couple weeks release or an every month release. And so that's some of the main drivers around moving to distributed and Agile. So here, I'm going to show a few case studies that we have internally that some concerns that and some things that a lot of why some folks are moving to a distributed Agile environment. The first one is from a large investment bank, and as you can see that there's a need to connect to a lot of different areas that are local, that have local needs, and those stakeholders are actually separated out by location. So that's another reason why they are moving to distributed environments. And then the other one is that they have a very large set of employees, from over 31,000 employees in more than 100 countries. And they have each team has their own different approaches to software development, and it can be driven because of cultural organization and corporate heritage. And that's really another main driver for actually moving a large global team to do Agile practices. So before I actually get into some how to actually do distributed Agile, I think the thing to really keep in mind is that when you have distributed teams and you're trying to do Agile, the big thing you want to do is co-location. And so the elephant in the room when you're doing a distributed environment is that co-location most likely is going to go away. So the first thing I'd like to do is just talk a little bit about why, traditionally why co-location is so important. And then what I'm going to do, for the rest of the course of this webinar is actually go into more detail about how you can overcome to do Agile when you're not in a co-located environment. So the first one that comes up, that's really common for doing co-location is pair programming, where you can have two developers sit side by side and review a piece of code. And there's some major reasons for doing that. One is you can have a more junior developer learn from a more senior developer, but also you can have you can knowledge share the code base with multiple developers. So that one developer that was sitting with the other developer is now more familiar with a certain area of code that they might not have been familiar with before by sitting right next to that other developer. Another one is meetings. There's a lot of different types of meetings that you have in Agile. The most common one is a stand-up meeting that you have on a daily basis. Reason for doing co-location is you can very quickly and easily see what's working, what's not working. If there's anything blocking, and in real time you can and remove any impediments that might be in the way. When you're not co-located, it's that's going to be a little more challenging, and I'll spend a lot of time talking about how to overcome that without being co-located. So I mentioned daily stand-ups. Another important meeting is sprint planning meetings. This is also something you might do every few weeks during an iteration or sprint. And you want to you have co-location so that you can actually meet with the product management team, the development management team, and the developers to actually come up with a plan for that short duration of time, whether that's a 2-week or 3-week sprint or iteration. Another one is the retrospective and review meetings, and this is something that you do at the end of every sprint or iteration, and also at the end of a release. And the idea is that you kind of look back. You look at what did well, what didn't do well at the sprint level as well as the release level, and you make better plans for that for the next release or next sprint. One of the reasons why co-location is so important about this is that the body language plays an important fact in this, with seeing if people are happy with the current process, if they have some real issues with it, and it's just to try to get people more comfortable with actually bringing up some of the issues that they might see, so that moving forward that you can roll that into the process for your internal process. And without being co-located, it's not going to be as easy. But again, I'll spend some time talking about how to do some of that in a non-co-located environment or distributed environment. So another big part of why co-location is so important is there's constant communication. You can You can just jump up and talk to somebody across a cubicle wall. If you have a question, you can walk over to their office. It's really easy to get information from whoever you need it, whether that be another developer or the Scrum Master or a project management person, or even a development manager, or even the product management team. So it's very easy to get that information when you're co-located. So you have that constant communication that's pretty much available. Another thing is from a management perspective is visibility. From a development management perspective, if you're a developer manager or product manager and you want to kind of just see what the team is up to, if they're working on things that they're supposed to be doing, and when you're co-located, it's very easy to see. You actually see that person in the chair actually working on a code. If you're not co-located, it becomes a little more challenging because you have to use other tactics to ensure that the team is working on what they're supposed to be doing, and also just make sure that they're not stuck again with any impediments or blocking issues. Another thing that's really important about co-location, it's really easy to build trust when you're co-located. You can actually get to know that person on a personal basis. You get a better sense of who they are and some of the subtleties of their body language and just where they're coming from when you're co-located. When you're not co-located, you can fall into an us versus them type of mentality, and it's also very common that you don't have that personal connection with someone you're not co-located with, and it's also a very important thing to build with any software team is a level of trust. And I'll spend some time about how to alleviate some of those issues you might have of not being co-located, how to build. All right, so before I actually talk about some of the things of how to do distributed agile or distributed development, I just want to take a moment and talk about a bad example of distributed development. Here's an example. This picture here is where you see some guys that are trying to connect a bridge together. They didn't line up. A couple things they had a lack of communication, an unclear goal and plan, and weak transition of ownership. Those are all kind of typical things that you have when you see failures in this area. So I have my own personal experience with a bad example doing distributed development. About 5 years ago, I was working as a consultant, and I was designing an application for a medical software company. And the team that I was actually just hired on as a consultant, the team that I was working with was remote. I'd worked in the past with the development manager that hired me to do the design work, so I had some rapport with him, and I always had a good working relationship, and everything I designed for him, and it was always very successful. So didn't think much of it starting this new project. He gave me the requirements to design it out with. I designed it out. And then after I designed it out, I just spent a couple meetings talking with the development team that was actually going to execute this the requirements and actually deliver the project. And as a consultant, I wasn't very heavily involved in that development process, other than just maybe a kickoff meeting and a high-level overview meeting. And it was my understanding that they would call me up or ask questions as needed. So as it turned out, I reviewed the design with them. It was a full working prototype. It was very clear, from my perspective, what the end executed goal should look like. But then handing it over to them, I didn't hear anything back for maybe a few months from the other party, for the development party, and then maybe a few months passed, and I got a call from my contact at the company I was consulting with and said, hey, you know what, we're on a call. We want to talk with some of the stakeholders about the product that we're just starting to release. So I said, yeah, sure, I can jump on the call. We can talk. So so I was on the call with them, and maybe they started to talk about some of the concerns that they had with the product and how it was designed and the final output of it. And I was pretty surprised because for one, I hadn't heard feedback like that from working with this guy before and this company before, and to hear that was was kind of shocking. And then they started to go into detail about what wasn't working, and then it dawned on me that what they were talking about didn't sound anything like with what I had originally designed. So I just said, hey, let's fire up a visual video of a net meeting. At that time, it was before the days of WebEx. So I reviewed it, and immediately I saw that what they were looking at didn't look exactly like what I had designed. So I saw it, and I was in the meeting, and I was working from home at the time, and I said, guys, just hold on a second. I need to go take a break real quick. So I left. I put down the phone. I walked in the kitchen. I grabbed a beer, And I started drinking some beer, and then I came back to the meeting because there was no way that I was going to be able to handle this meeting just completely sober, based on how bad that design had gone astray. So at the end of the day, after that meeting, we had some nice remediation plan, and it was just to basically work more closely together and get that prototype working, or the executed final thing to be a lot more like the original prototype. So it was actually good news for me in the end, because it was a win-win situation. Not only did I learn that communication is very important, but also that I got some more consulting work out of it. But for the end company, it was really bad for them, because they ended up spending more money, and it took a lot longer for them to deliver. And you can look and see that there was a few main tenets of why that didn't work. Number one, there was a lack of communication. I didn't really communicate with them very well about what needed to be done, and they didn't communicate back to me if they had questions. There was also an unclear goal and plan from their perspective, because what they ended up doing was just using it as a guideline, my prototype, whereas it was my understanding that it should have been the de facto design document, and that's how it actually should have been developed. So there was really an unclear goal and plan between the two parties. And the last one is there was really a weak transition of ownership. I mean, it was really pretty much just thrown over the fence to the development team without really a handoff and ensuring that the vision was carried out through the development phase. And those factors are all really key to when you're doing distributed development. No matter what development process you're doing, whether that's Agile or Waterfall or some other process. What I'd like to do is, talk a little bit about, the first thing I'd like to do is talk about how to organize these distributed teams. The first thing is if you have a larger team, you're going to try to break it up into smaller co-located teams and a few maybe even dispersed teams. Now, what I mean by dispersed teams are teams that are distributed themselves. That means you might have members in one team that are spread across the globe. I worked a long time on a team that had developers in, we had a couple of developers in Colorado, we had a developer in Argentina, or a couple of developers in Argentina, we had developers in Kentucky and in Australia and in California, and we worked very well together as a team. But it is definitely a challenging thing to do that. So again, here what I would recommend doing is if you can, divide the teams up into smaller teams that are co-located, or if you have some guys that are dispersed, try to get them all together in a team as well. The other idea is to have each one of those teams roll up to a management team. And in this picture right here, what I'm just showing is our own internal discussion forum of how these teams are broken out. And more importantly, each one of these teams, they named each team they gave themselves their own name, and they have, so they can have a little bit of personal pride with their team name and how they organize it. So the next thing that's really important about doing Agile when you're not co-located is pair programming. And here's a couple screenshots about how to do that without being co-located. So the first one is to get a code review tool. Here, this is a screenshot of what we use internally. We use Review Board internally, but there's a lot of other tools out there, such as if you're doing Git commits, if you're Git committers, there's Garrett, which is also very good. But the idea here is that you can actually review code online, annotate the code, provide feedback, and then give it a final thumbs up of a ship it after you agree that code is actually ready to be committed. So it actually performs the same function of pair programming, but then even further, it actually can stay as an artifact for further reference for other developers that want to go back and learn what other developers have done in the past. And actually, personally, I've found it very useful for me to really have a deep understanding of how things are being architected or how things are being developed internally, so I can have a better understanding of what's being done. The other important thing about pair programming is that knowledge sharing aspect. And so there's a couple ways that we recommend that we do it internally on distributed teams, and we use discussion forums to communicate smaller ideas across. But then if there's a larger architectural document, usually what we'll do is we'll put it in a wiki and have a developer or several developers contribute to that wiki, so it's a living document of an architectural diagram and some architectural information about some coding practices that we might do for a particular area of our code. Then there's the next part is around meetings without co-location. So here on the top right, here's a picture of some guys doing some video conferencing. They're all in different locations. I don't think you need to go that far. I think this is might be a little overkill for some guys to have the video conference. If you want to try that, sure, that you might find that useful, but I personally don't think it's necessary. But what I do think is necessary is what's shown a screenshot in the bottom left here is that when you have those daily stand-up meetings, that you actually publish it to the team so that all your team members can actually see that and get information about what's going on in those various teams. You can use we use our discussion forums sometimes. We also use Google Docs to publish this as well. And really, these stand-up notes really is as simple as what I did yesterday, what I'm going to do, and is there anything blocking me? And that's in a nutshell. For each user that's on the team, they just update their notes accordingly, and then it can go back that anyone else that's interested can go back and review those notes without having to be physically there during that stand-up meeting. So another meeting that's really important about the Agile process and that really helps a lot being co-located is the sprint planning meeting. Usually you do the sprint planning meeting at the beginning of every sprint. The whole idea of the sprint planning is you the product management team and the development team figure out what needs to be worked on, and they estimate those items accordingly, and then they start to plan out what's going to be going on for the next 2 to 3 weeks for that team. What I've done is what I suggest to do is to make that more informal and last a couple days rather than just an hour or two. The first part is that you want to do the estimation part up front and allow for several developers to chime in offline on a particular artifact and provide what they think the estimation should be. Then at the time of actually the formal sprint planning meeting, you already have some rough estimates in place, and you can do any estimate refinement during that sprint planning meeting, and it's a lot more quicker to pick up what you're going to be working on because everything has already been ranked and there's already been at least a high-level estimate for all those stories picked up. So you can make those sprint planning meetings a lot shorter. The other part is how to make the duration of sprints. Typically, sprints should last about 2 weeks. But if you're doing a distributed team, you might want to look at extending that past 2 weeks, or maybe what we do internally is 3 weeks. And some of the rationale for that is that this longer sprint planning session it takes a little bit longer to get the ball rolling during a sprint. And also with the distributed team, you have more back and forth between those different locations. So just to spread it out for another week, it allows people to actually feel like they can get actually stuff done in 3 weeks without having to miss their milestone every sprint, or to make the story small enough that where it's might be hard to make the story small enough where it fits in a 2-week schedule with a slightly slower velocity at the beginning when you have some of that cross communication across the different locations. Now the next meeting that is important that comes up in Agile is retrospectives and planning meetings. So the sprint review meetings where you actually review the work that was done in that sprint. Typically you do that at the end of the sprint where you go through all the stories that made it into to that sprint or iteration. And the idea is that part of it is doing user acceptance testing. What I recommend to do is actually to do an ad hoc user acceptance testing as the stories are ready, as they come off to be reviewed, that you do it offline with that developer. If you need to do it online, find a time that works for everybody and record it so that other folks that weren't able to make it can actually review that, such as QA or docs, that maybe some other peripheral members that want to be part of that acceptance process. There might be some times where you actually need to do it face to face, or at least in the same time or in real time, and so I'd recommend just setting up a WebEx or some sort of conference call where you can review what those what's being done. The other meeting that goes along that is the sprint retrospective that you have at the end of the sprint, and the purpose of this meeting is really to go over and say, hey, what worked well, what didn't work well, and then try to improve the process for the next sprint. So this one is important still to do. Try to find a time that works for everybody. If you can't find a time that works for everybody, try to make it work for most of the people, or at least and then have the few remote folks have them have the harder time to make it a harder time for them if you need to. The best place to put this sprint retrospective is to tack it on the end of a stand-up meeting for the last day of that sprint, so it's just part of that sprint. And I'd recommend to keep it no more than an hour, just to kind of go through everything for that sprint retrospective meeting. Then the next big one is the release retrospective that you do at the end, the release retrospective in the planning meeting that you do at the end of every release and the beginning of every release. So it's really back to back. I would argue that this one really should be done in person, and then if you can't get everybody that's on the team in person, at least you should get the stakeholders together and meet. And we've been really trying to do this internally, where we get the high-level architects and the development managers and the product management all together to talk about what worked, what didn't work in the release, come up with any process improvements for the next release, and also to talk about high-level planning about what we want to do for the next release as well. The nice thing about doing this co-located is that you have some of those important decisions are being made, and those important meetings that tend to run long. It's just a lot easier if everybody's in the same time zone at least, or even in the same location. All right, so the next part about constant communication without co-location is knowledge sharing. As I mentioned before, that if you're co-located and maybe there's a more senior developer and you have a more junior developer that might have a lot of questions about architecture or how to do coding, they can just pop up and walk over to that person's desk and ask them questions in real time. Well, if you're not co-located, that makes it a little harder. So what we recommend for that knowledge sharing part is to actually put it up somewhere that's easily accessible. We use our own internal wikis for that a lot, where we actually put up information about whether that's high-level requirement information, or whether that might be some architectural documents that describe more technical details of what we're going to do. And here in this screenshot, this is something that we just added a couple releases ago of some of the ranking design, the sequencing design that we have, and how it works, with some of the mechanics of how it works inside the application. And this is really helpful not only for other developers, but it's also helpful for QA and also for documentation as well. So then there's another part about the constant communication without being co-located, and that's the social aspect of it. A lot of times when you have teams developers, they don't just talk about work. They're talking about, hey, what are you doing this weekend? Hey, what are your hobbies? What are you interested in? All that stuff is something that you get when you're co-located. And when you're not co-located, it's still an important part of working with other developers or other team members. So one thing we try to encourage is to actually help bridge that gap with doing some internal social networking. At the very least, we use our own user profiles. It's where we can, at least you can see who that put a name with a face, and maybe there might be some personal information you might glean from that person by looking at their profile. But also, you might want to, some of our internal developers also blog a lot, so you can learn about, what they're thinking from a technical perspective and also a personal perspective from their blogs and other social networking sites as well. So this is also something that I'd recommend doing is getting your team together on a social basis using social networking is also a very key part. But then another part is that you can't just not be co-located and retire and rely on tools solely. There's also, it's important to actually have get-togethers. Try to have an offsite at least a few times a year where you get global development team all together. And this picture here is actually our development team, part of our development team playing cricket on the beach in Chennai, India. We're having an offsite here. Everyone's having a lot of fun, and it's just people are getting to know each other a lot better. You can build that personal bond with the rest of the team members. Some common things to avoid, without constant communication, is to have long email threads. If you're communicating via email and people are replying back in line in the thread, if you get a couple levels deep in that thread, you really should just stop and set up some time to meet, because it's really hard for everybody on the thread to follow and to really understand what is actually the larger context. Things get lost in translation, things get lost in context when you're about 3 levels or 4 levels deep in an email thread. So I would really recommend that you don't do that. The other one is that you really don't want to just rely on non-real-time tools to communicate. Again, as I mentioned before, you want to have the ability to have IRC, to use Skype, pick up the phone, talk to people, and also ensure that you actually have a good, good phone system when you're working on that. Sometimes, I've worked in the past where it was really hard to hear people because either they had a call from home or call from the road because it was an inconvenient time for them. So look for a time where those folks can actually make it in the office, and that you actually or provide better phone equipment for them so that you can actually have a better communication when you're not all in the same place. All right, so the next part is, talking about is visibility without collocation, or what we call traceability in Teamforge. And this graphic here is really kind of just showing sort of the life of a defect or an artifact within Teamforge, and how that can be communicated to different stakeholders and different team members. So here on the top left, you see that a developer is actually working on an artifact. That can trigger a monitoring email from that update of that artifact that can let other folks know, such as the VP of Engineering. Let's say that VP of Engineering is en route to talk to a customer. They can see in real time that the developer has actually picked that up, that they're working on it. So they can feel more confident going to that customer call that actually it's going to be fixed soon. Then once the developer actually makes a commit, you can actually have that be triggered to send up another monitoring message, as well as trigger off a test job, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the continuous integration as well. But once they can make a commit, then that can actually trigger that they change the status to being ready for QA. QA person who's maybe monitoring it, they can see that they need to pick it up, and they can start doing some testing. And after they do some testing, they update the status and they say that it's fixed. That triggers another monitor event. The developer gets that message and they feel great that they actually passed QA, and they can move on to the next artifact or story that they're working on. And that also triggered an event to the VP of Engineering. So now that they know that not only did the developer completed a development on it, but it's also verified by QA. So they can go to that customer meeting. They can very quickly and easily tell that defect has been fixed and it's been verified by QA, so they can go back and take that back to the customer very quickly without having to be co-located, without having to talk to the developer and the QA person directly. And so the idea is that it ensures collateral is used for communication, code review, and meeting notes. They're all easily available for all team members. All you need to do is monitor that object, such as an artifact. So another part about visibility is managing the process. So you need, if you're not co-located, I'd really recommend relying heavily on project manager to ensure the process is followed. The key part here is that you want to make sure that estimates are set and updated on a regular basis. So if you have some initial understanding of what the estimate should be at the beginning of the sprint planning session, and that changes midway through, it's very important for the developers to update their estimates so you get a better sense of what your remaining effort is and what your estimated effort is. It's also important that the proper channels are used for questions and comments. In my previous example of what didn't work in distributed development, you can see that there was an issue with that there wasn't a proper channel. They never got back to me to say ensure that they were actually doing the right thing. They just kind of inferred internally that they were doing the right thing without even addressing some of the external stakeholders. So the idea here is that you want to make sure that if there's impediments for the team, that maybe the project manager is involved. If there's questions about the requirements, that you get a hold of that project manager or a product owner to make sure that they're actually in the loop and they're available to answer some of those questions. That's a very important part about doing the process when you're not co-located. And the other part is that you want to be able to use a tool for project management where you can see all those artifacts or all those stories in a place in rank order and being able to rank those very easily and effectively in one place. And not only that, but also to have some metrics available, such as a burn down chart, capacity chart, that's available for the team's consumption in real time. Okay, so another part is to not only to manage the process, but also manage progress. You need a way to look at progress at many different levels. You need to be able to see it on a per sprint basis. You need to be able to see it on a per team basis for each sprint. So you need both the individual team view and an aggregate view for the larger cross team view for that iteration, as well as even cross iteration if you want to track it for the entire release. Here's a couple screenshots here. At the top right is burn down chart showing just some progress of a current iteration, and down below here is a task board where you can actually see things being moved and their current statuses on a task by task basis. So it really gives some visibility into what's going on without having a physical card wall, and so you can make this available for all your team members across the different locations. All right, so the next really, I think the probably very important part about doing any development process, whether that's Agile or not, is trust. Trust is a little harder to do when you're not co-located. It takes time. You need to ensure that message and direction to the team is clearly communicated for management, and that when things change, that that also is clearly communicated. That that developers never feel like they're the last to know, and that that they feel like they have an open dialogue with the management team for the development group. You also, from a management perspective, you really need to ensure that commitments to the team are followed through. If you've made a commitment that at the end of the release, something good is going to happen, you're going to have an offsite, try to stick to it. It's very important, to build trust that way that if you say you're going to do something for the team, that you actually follow through with that. The other part is you want to make sure that team members get to know each other on a personal basis. The way you do that is you have that few offsites a few times a year, where you actually get together. You fly people out if necessary. You try to find a place that makes sense for everybody to meet in, and you try to do that. And it's a really important part to make sure the teams work better. The cost up front of getting everyone together is worth the increased velocity and that you get with a team when you have trust among the team members. Another thing you might want to do is create a few cross-location teams for some projects. The notion here is that you can build trust among some team members, and then further on that kind of cross-pollinates the other team members to feel like they know of that person because the person that worked on that team with them. So they can take that back to the guys that they work with locally and say, oh yeah, I worked with so-and-so, from a different country, and they did a great job, and so next time when they're interacting with the other team members, they have a better understanding of who that person is. You also want to make sure that key members are available in most times. So that means that sometimes you might have a development manager or a product manager, maybe someone that's more senior for the team. You need to make sure that they are more flexible about their time, that they're able to make those early morning and late night calls if you have a truly global team, that they're available and that they can actually talk and share dialogue with the other team members. It's also a very important part about building trust among the team members. All right, so I spent some time talking about some things in detail about not co-location. Now what I'd like to do is talk about the next thing is around source code management control without co-location. So one thing we did internally, we used Subversion internally for our development group. We had a Subversion server used to set up in Brisbane, California. And we did a test where we actually looked at about how long it would take to download that source code from that Brisbane server to Chennai, India. What we found is to download the full source code contents was about 3 gigs. It took about a few hours to download. Then what we did is we actually set up a mirror locally in Chennai that actually was a mirror copy of the Subversion server in Brisbane. What we found is it went from about 3 hours to about 16 minutes to get that full checkout for that full repo. And how we did that is this new tool that we have within TeamForge called Subversion Edge. How it works is you can set up one master Subversion integration server anywhere in the world, and you can set up several mirrors or edge servers for each location. And what you get with that is you have the local checkout, or you have a local copy of that main integration server. So you can do local reads from that local server. When you make a commit, it does a write-through proxy back to the main integration server, so you don't have to worry about conflicts with check-in conflicts. It works the same way that you would normally with Subversion integration. So that part is handled very well, and it makes it a lot easier for anyone that's in a global area to be able to check out something and have a local copy of it. And also the nice thing, with TeamForge, you also can ensure that it only is what's being downloaded to those local repositories is only what's available for those logged in users. So if someone is in a different location as a site admin, they could access all of those different repositories that they need to. However, if you just have maybe one remote developer that wants to create a local copy, they could only download repos that they have access to. And even if you're using path-based permissions, which allows you to only access certain parts of that repo, they would only be able to download those certain parts of that repository. So another thing that comes up a lot without co-location is, how to do testing, is specifically with continuous integration. So here, here's a diagram of something that we're working on right now, and that'll be out pretty soon with how to do continuous integration without co-location, and how to actually provision the hardware without being co-located. So here's an example, just a standard workflow. A developer can pick up the next available work item. This is standard, using our internal tools. The next thing is the developer can make a commit change on behalf of that work item. As I alluded to earlier, once I make the commit, that can actually wake up a test job or a continuous integration job to wake up. So that wakes up the CI process to see the commit. And what it does, it decides to start a continuous integration job or a test job. When it does that, the next thing that it needs hardware to be able to do that. So here's the real key part here is that we can actually do elastic provisioning of that hardware. So that hardware isn't actually up and running. It's a virtual cloud hardware. And when it's needed, it actually wakes up, provisions that hardware on the fly, becomes available for testing. And then down below here in the E part, you can actually see a spike where those test boxes have been provisioned and are being used for testing. Once they're done with testing, those test boxes can go away, and you can see that graph drops back down, and the resources are returned to the pool for other uses. So you have, again, now you're not only saving space, but you're also saving box power that can be used for testing other things. So it's a really great way to actually do continuous integration without having dedicated hardware 100% of the time, when it's only being used for a small fraction of that for testing. All right, so the other thing that comes up, about not doing co-location is scalability of your project management tool. If you're going to be using Agile project management in a distributed environment, it really better scale, because chances are you're going to be needing it to work across several different teams in a very large organization. Maybe you don't have that yet, but if everything goes well, you will want to stick on the same sort of platform, if you will, to make sure that works, moving forward, and when you have a lot of members that are on that project or on that site. So here's just a quick screenshot of showing the number of defects here internally. There's almost 33,000 here. This is our own internal thing, but you can actually, this is actually a pretty low count for some of our customers. We have some of our customers have artifacts in the millions. And it still scales very well for them. So it's very important, I think, to ensure that whatever tools you guys use, that you can ensure that it scales if you think that you're going to be having a lot of team members on your project or site. All right, so the other really big issue that you might have with distributed development is the tools that you use. each location can have their own flavor of tools that they like to use. Maybe they might use their own homegrown version for bug count somewhere. Some guys might be using Bugzilla. Other places might be using Jira. For SCM, you might have some guys that are using Subversion, other ones that are using Git, other ones that are using Perforce. You might have some IDEs that people are using. Some might be using Eclipse. Or Visual Studio. So how do you really reconcile that? Can you ensure that everybody is speaking the same language or even on the same project if you're using all these disparate tools? The answer there is that you want to have a single platform. And the reason why a single platform is so important is that you can actually have all of those tools, the tracking tool, the SCM tool, your collaboration tools of documents and wikis, etc., all in one place. And it's important because it's going to dramatically speed global development. You're going to have improved quality, visibility, and traceability because everything is working together in one central platform. And the other part is this transparency of being able to access everything in one central place is going to make everything transparent. And that transparency will breed trust and will drive reuse. You'll have the trust because now you can really see in real time what other people are really doing. And not only that, but if you have code that you actually want to be showing out in other places, you can trust that because now you have that tighter communication and tighter collaboration with those other teams. And so it'll be easier to reuse some of that source code in other places based on your communication with those other teams. So I'm wrapping up here. I just want to say a few things about if you've learned nothing else, there's something very important things about what I've talked about. The first one is that Agile does not require a co-location for everything. You can actually do things distributed if you use the provided tools. The other important part is that tight collaboration and coordination is vital. To have that collaboration, that constant communication, it's very important to ensure that you actually have the team working together, that they can share information, and that they're in the loop about what else is going on with the larger project. And the big thing is leverage technology. Technology helps bridging a lot of these obstacles, such as communication obstacles, collaboration, visibility, traceability. All of these things can be handled by using tools. The other part is the integrated platform is key to breed transparent reuse and ultimately trust, right? So having that one platform with all these tools is very helpful. It's a very helpful way for you to ensure that everybody can go to the one place and see all that information, and have the wikis being associated with other objects such as tracker artifacts or discussion forums, etc. The other part is that finding the right tools for your team is very imperative, but it's not the only answer, right? So there are some times where you actually should be getting and spending some face-to-face time. You actually should ensure that you guys are building trust by doing other things such as offsites, such as retrospectives face-to-face. Those are also very key things to do for your Agile team if you want to do distributed development. So with that, what I'd like to do is just spend a few more minutes talking about a little bit about CollabNet and who we are. So the first thing about CollabNet is the founder of Subversion, and we're the corporate sponsor. We're the #1 Subversion and Subversion Edge downloads, and we're being used by more than 5 million plus developers worldwide. Our flavor of Subversion. We're also the leader in Agile development. We're the #1 trainer in Scrum Masters. We have trained over 10,000 people, and we also train certified product owners as well. We have the leading Agile tool on the market, ScrumWorks Pro, and we're also the provider of the TeamForge platform for distributed application lifecycle management. TeamForge accelerates software delivery by 50% or more. We can actually show that jumping on our platform with this traceability, with this collaboration, actually improves software delivery by about 50%. We have 700 plus customers and 400,000 plus end users worldwide. TeamForge is very scalable, and it works for the enterprise with 50,000 plus users. And so, thank you very much. Again, my name is Brian Zajcik. I'm the TeamForge product manager, If you have any questions or comments about this presentation or about Teamforge in general, you can feel free to email me at bzychik@collab.net. And with that, thank you very much for your time, and look to talk to you again soon. Thanks.
Well, Brian, I know that you've got to go, so we'll go ahead and let you leave now. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. And to the audience, apologies for not having the time to address questions live. Brian and CollabNet do have a transcript of the questions posed, and we'll address them via email. Again, thank you for joining us today, Brian Zaitchik. Now be sure to check out our next broadcast taking place tomorrow morning. Teresa Lanowitz will be presenting Development Clouds, delivering peace between developers and testing. Last but not least, I want to thank everyone involved and also to everyone who attended. Have a nice day.